And welcome back to Morning Talk. You're listening to KSVC 980 AM and 100.5 FM. Porter Huntsman and Dylan Nielsen alongside with you this morning, and it is time now for our Radio Roundup interview for today. This morning we are joined by Christine Cooke Fairbanks with Sutherland Institute, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you on this morning and talk a little bit about some of the things going on with education here in the state of Utah. Now, it talks about a little bit of this in Innovation Reforms for Utah's Open Enrollment Law, a new report from Sutherland Institute. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what went into putting that report together?
Yeah, so open enrollment is one of the many education choice concepts or policies that exist in Utah. So education choice is this really broad principle where families have options so they can meet the needs of their children. Lots of times we focus on private choice, like scholarships and things like that, but public choice is a really key piece. Has generally a lot of support, been around for decades. So charter schools would be an example, but open enrollment is another key piece, which is basically that students can transfer to schools outside of their assigned attendance zones or their districts. Utah has a really strong law, but we also see that there's plenty of room for reform as well to just make it even stronger.
Now, I actually show that education choice is already built into public education in some important ways. Can you expand on what that means and give a summary of what you found in your research?
Sure. So we really looked at kind of what the Utah law already does and where some of these glaring gaps are, right? So national rankings, by the way, they always come out near the top. Last year, Utah earned an A for open enrollment. So we're one of the states that requires accepting students if the certain threshold of student capacity hasn't been met yet. So you have to accept those students. School boards have a lot of responsibilities. They have to create policies. Applications have to be online. They have to follow state guidelines about what they can and cannot consider when accepting these transfer students. There's a lot of transparency that's required by state boards, something that we looked at and, in fact, found lacking a severe compliance issue there. And so those are some of the things we saw, right, that were needs for reform. Can we get the districts to comply with what's already in the law? Can there be a state-based transparency requirement? Right now, it's really hard to know how many families are taking advantage of open enrollment. Where are they applying? How many are requesting? Who's being accepted and rejected? So some of those things are in the report, and it goes into others as well. But I think transparency would be a big piece of what we see as kind of a new area that we need to expand in.
So were there any other areas you saw that Utah needs to do some reform in open enrollment laws for?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this falls in the line of transparency, but right now, school boards have to tell parents if their student was accepted or rejected, right? But they don't have to supply them with a reason. That might be very helpful for parents to know how they maybe could correct that in the future, where they need to go. So that's another piece of transparency. As I mentioned in the law, it does say what school boards can consider or what they cannot consider when accepting or rejecting a student. So one of those that isn't listed, though, would be a prohibition of address discrimination, basically saying we can't consider the neighborhood that this child comes from. So, some people would say, well, we don't do that. I think that's a good, safe answer. But there are a lot of things that could just be preempted in the law. There's some examples in some other states where sort of a subtle bias has come into some of the discussions about open enrollment, saying, we're a wealthier area. The price of homes kind of keeps certain kids out, things like that. So just to completely prevent that would be another area that we would see that would make a lot of sense. I will say kind of a key takeaway from this process of reviewing what the districts offer. All 41 districts had something about open enrollment, but that was very generous to say. It's very different depending on the district. And what was required by law, and I mentioned this earlier, something that we call the capacity report. So the law says you have to share these 7 pieces of information. It's things like the school's maximum capacity, their adjusted capacity, enrollment requests, and things like that. We found that only 7 had a full capacity report. There's 14 that had a partial, and then 20, so almost exactly half, don't have anything about this, and it is required by law. So we think that there's probably just a lack of awareness, perhaps from the board. They are sensitive to the fact that they have a lot of requirements that they have to comply with. But this is really important, right? We want a lot of transparency so that parents can make the best decisions and have full education choice.
Now, a large part of this is parental choice. So what are you hearing from parents about this when it comes to their kids' education?
Yeah, we've had some interesting conversation with parents. I think, there's still the concept that families want to move close to where they want to enroll their student, right? So there is this still really close connection between where you live, where you buy a home, and the school that your kid goes to. And part of open enrollment is to say that doesn't need to be so closely connected, right? That every school in the state should be able to accept your student if they have that capacity. So we do understand that parents make decisions based on that. And also that some of these issues get really kind of gnarly around high growth areas as boundaries change and families wanted to stay in an old school that they had or a prior school that they had been in. Sometimes there's confusion about whether or not they can still go, and acceptance questions have been really tricky. And so we just want to learn more, right? The big piece here is we want this to be as user-friendly for parents as possible. We want less confusion. We want more transparency. And I think that, kind of highlighting these issues in this report, showing what's not there, is a key way to kind of take that step forward.
So usually these two things kind of align, but not always. So are you seeing any differences between what the parents think about the open enrollment issue and what the general voter populace thinks about it?
We did some registered voter survey data, and it broke it out just by general voters, right? And it did show that there is a high lack of awareness of kind of the open enrollment laws, but also that there is a high support for reforming this. I can only imagine that parents would be the ones who actually would support this because they're the ones that actually have to engage with the districts and the websites and things like that. So more data will come out on this in the future as well. But I think overall, and I think this comes through in a lot of different data, there's a lack of awareness of what the laws are, and then there's a lot of support for improving it. And that's certainly the case with open enrollment.
Now, the legislative session is just about over. Can you give us an overview of the discussions that happened on this topic that may help lay the groundwork for future possible reforms?
So open enrollment itself was not a main feature, but certainly education choice has come up. I still think that the state is very interested in moving forward with education choice because I think it's a principle we've bought into for decades now, and we continue to reform it and to expand it. So I think that's really good news for education choice in general, including open enrollment. But I do think that there's more interest in an audit to sort of understand what's happening and what's not happening first. And I think that's the direction that it'll be going this year.
So if anyone would like to read this report from Sutherland Institute or learn more about this topic, where's the best place to find that information?
Yep, you can go to sutherlandinstitute.org. There's going to be a publication. There's also some blogs that kind of break it down in a more simplified way. And we hope anyone that's interested goes and takes a look.
Once again, joined this morning by Cooke Fairbanks, an Education Policy Fellow with Sutherland Institute. We do appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. Before we let you go, is there anything else you want to make sure you mention or let our listeners know about this morning?
Sure. There's actually a podcast on this very topic. We have somebody who joined us from Yes Every Kid. It's another nonprofit group that talks about open enrollment. So we hope that you check that out as well.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much.
That's going to do it for our Radio Roundup interview for today here on